My name is Mary Newton. I'm the Vice President of the Reading League Wisconsin, and I just want to extend a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us this evening. We are going to be hearing about the power of early talk. Such an important topic, and we are so fortunate to have some real experts in the field joining us this evening. So before we get started, I have just a couple of announcements. First, we are recording this, and so if you want to access the recording or pass it on to a friend after this evening is over, it'll be posted on the YouTube channel of the Reading League Wisconsin. Not the National Reading League, but the Reading League Wisconsin. We have our own YouTube channel, and it'll be a public recording, so you don't need a password to access it. We also have handouts for you, copies of the PowerPoint slides from this evening. So in just a moment, when I hop off and turn it over to the presenters, I will post a link in the chat so that you can access the handouts. I'm also going to ask you if you would please leave your microphones on mute unless something comes up later where you really need to ask a question and unmute, but it'll make our listening experience a lot better for the evening if we have a quiet background. But please do pop your questions in the chat if you think of something that you're not sure about or you want more information on, and we will access the chat and try to answer the questions that you have. I'm also going to be posting a link in the chat to a form that you can use for two purposes. First, you can use it to request a certificate of attendance if you would like one of those. And secondly, you can use that same form to request additional information on the Lena technology, which you'll be hearing about tonight. So the folks at Lena have graciously offered to email out additional information to those of you who are interested in that. So please use that form for those two purposes. And if you could get that filled out this evening, that will allow us to respond promptly to you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Maura Moyle. Maura is an associate professor of speech pathology and audiology at Marquette University, and she is on the board of directors of the Reading League Wisconsin. Maura organized this evening's presentation, so I'm going to let her introduce herself and her co-panelists and get us started. Maura?
Well, thank you, Mary. It is wonderful to be here. I'm so excited that we're giving this presentation, that my colleagues are here, my collaborators are here to talk with me to emphasize the importance of early language in laying the foundation for literacy development. So like Mary said, I'm at Marquette University, and for most of the last 15 years or so, I've been researching early language and literacy, primarily in Head Start classrooms in Milwaukee. And more recently, and also, so within that, I've been looking at language and literacy development in kids who are in low income kind of urban neighborhoods, and also working with early childhood educators, providing professional development. More recently, John Heilman and I, who collaborated quite a bit, have been looking at the impact of Lena Grow on educators' instruction and on children's outcomes, and he's going to be talking more about that. And that's how we met Jill Gilkerson, who is the Chief Research and Evaluation Officer at Lena. So I'm going to give it to her to talk more about herself.
Okay, hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Maura and Mary, for organizing this webinar. It's great to be able to talk a little bit about what we do and its interface with early reading. I am a linguist specializing in early language acquisition by training. At Lena, I am, as Maura said, the Chief Research and Evaluation Officer, and that basically means that I'm in charge of collecting and analyzing the data that's in our corpus. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Lena as we get further into it, but I'll hand it over to John to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm John Heilman. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So following the previous lead here, I also study early language development and the Foundation for Literacy. And then also very interested in projects translating the research into practice. So how do we develop partnerships and see how these interventions and assessments look in day-to-day clinical and educational contexts?
Okay, great. So our agenda for this evening, I'll be talking about the relationship between oral language and reading development, just kind of setting the stage and reviewing some of those concepts, and leading into the importance of linguistic input in early childhood. And from there, I'll hand it over to Jill, who will continue on that topic and specifically talk about LENA technology and programming to increase the richness of the language environment. And then John will be talking about the research that we've done implementing LENA Grow in the Milwaukee area and some of the impacts we've seen on educators and children in their classrooms. Then I'll come back and summarize what we've been talking about. And then we'll have time for questions and answers, and we would love to hear from you, your questions, your thoughts. We know a lot of you are probably working with older children, but love to hear how you think this could translate into your classrooms in terms of focusing on language. Okay, so oral language and reading development. So I am a speech language pathologist, and so is John Heilman. So of course we've studied language, that's our focus in our research and our teaching. This is a chart that was put together by the American Speech Language Hearing Association, or ASHA, which we are members of. And what I wanted to emphasize here, they got some milestones between birth to 5 years old, but language development really starts at birth. So in infancy, some of those reflexive behaviors are not necessarily communication for the child, but the adult interprets those as communicative. And eventually the child realizes, oh, wow, if I cry, I get something, or if I smile, the adults react, or I get people to engage with me. And it just builds from there, the phonological system, the vocabulary system, syntax, morphology. And then by 5 years old, typical language learners have very sophisticated linguistic systems by that time. They are not making a lot of grammatical errors. They have quite a corpus of vocabulary. They're telling stories, they're having conversations, and all that amazing language development, of course, continues through the school years, but so much happens from birth to 5, and it really sets the stage then for literacy development. Before kids are even starting with formal literacy instruction, all of this language growth has happened. Of course, there is early literacy development, also like alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness, print awareness, that kind of thing. But in terms of formal language literacy instruction, so much language development has occurred. So why is that important? Well, we know, so the simple view of reading, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with, well-accepted model of reading comprehension, which shows that word recognition, or emphasizes that word recognition and language comprehension, the product of those two, result in reading comprehension, which is the ultimate goal of reading, is to understand the content. So without language comprehension, there would be no reading comprehension. Same with word recognition. Both of those have to be in place for reading comprehension to occur, for kids to be successful in reading comprehension. Another model we love, the Scarborough's reading rope. Similar idea that there are two primary components to reading, the word recognition piece, and then also the language comprehension piece. And then within language comprehension, several strands that work together, vocabulary, language structures, or grammar, syntax, morphology, etc., that all of these strands weave together to result in skilled reading. Okay, so just some ideas that talk about the relationship between oral language and literacy. So Motes and Tolman stated listening comprehension may exceed reading comprehension, but the reverse is not true. And certainly we see that in children with dyslexia. Their listening comprehension is superior to their reading comprehension. One cannot understand by reading what one cannot understand by listening. So the oral language development must be in place for reading comprehension, for kids to be successful in reading comprehension. Another study talked about how basic skills, phonics, reading single words, so those word recognition skills best predict reading achievement in the early grades. And that makes sense because that's what's emphasized in early literacy instruction. But by 4th grade, language comprehension was the best predictor of reading ability. That's that stage where kids they kind of transition from learning to read to reading to learn. So again, language skills that support this reading comprehension start developing at birth. Okay. Now, one thing I just wanted to talk about is that reading outcomes are different for kids with language delays and impairments. I started in the dyslexia world, science of reading, 6-7 years ago. I mean, I've always kind of known the concepts, but really got more ingrained within the last 6 or 7 years. I've been in trainings for structured literacy, and I'm currently in the letters training, language essentials for teachers of reading. And a concept that comes up a lot is this idea that reading is hard. And because the brain isn't wired for reading, the brain is hardwired for oral language, but reading is a relatively recent human invention that must be learned. It's a skill that must be acquired versus oral language, which seems to just spontaneously occur. But as a speech language pathologist, I want to point out that for a large percentage, I mean, a fairly sizable percentage of children, developing oral language is not necessarily natural. They have a lot of difficulty with that. And for example, one study, and this has been replicated by other groups as well, has estimated that 7% of children have developmental language disorder. So that's a pretty, sizable percentage of children who really have difficulty acquiring oral language. And those children with developmental language disorder are at a higher risk of reading disability. There's Adloff and Hogan looked at many studies that looked at the co-occurrence of language disability and reading disability, and the percentages of co-occurrence ranged wildly from 17 to 71%, but depending on how you're measuring these things. But the idea is that the comorbidity between language and reading disabilities is very high. And there are other kids have challenges as well to oral language development due to other factors. Perhaps lower socioeconomic status is often correlated with a less rich language environment. Perhaps English language learners have challenges. So there are lots of kids where oral language is not as natural, and they need that rich linguistic input even more than typical language learners, who also need rich linguistic input to be successful in reading comprehension. So that's the moral of the story. High quality early language input or intervention is critical for all children, but especially children for whom it's not so natural. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jill Gilkerson. Oops, did I go? There we go. Oh, you're muted. There we go.
Okay, I am going to start out by talking a little about Lena. Lena is a national nonprofit on a mission to help caregivers positively influence child development through early talk technology and data-driven programs. So that early talk technology is what we call a talk pedometer, and it measures a child's language experience throughout the day, including our most important measure in terms of predictiveness, which is back and forth conversational turns. And I will talk about what that is in just a minute, but Lena has 4 core programs. We have Lena Grow for early childhood educators, Lena Start and Lena Home for parents and families, and Lena SP for researchers. So I encourage you to, if you want to learn more about our technology and programs, to visit our website, lena.org. So we like to say that Lena gives a voice to each child, no matter the language that they or their caregivers speak or the words that they use. We don't tell anybody what to say or how to say it. What matters really are those adult-child interactions and providing caregivers with feedback and strength-based strategies to help them increase those quality interactions with young children. So to that end, Lena technology is used in our programs to provide objective feedback to caregivers about how much they talk with children. At the same time, the data that we collect, it can and it does support wide-ranging research. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of that research in a few minutes, but first I'm going to begin by describing what Lena actually does. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Alrighty, so talk very briefly about our metrics, but if you'd like to dig into the details, we have a technical paper number 12, which includes technical definitions for all of our measures, as well as lots of info on segmentation, reliability, and validity. But basically what happens is children wear a device that captures their audio environment throughout the day. When I say children, I mean birth to 4, okay? Language environment throughout the day, then that audio recording is uploaded to a computer, and we have algorithms that are going to automatically identify the speaker or the source of the sound during every millisecond of that audio file. So that's like a full day recording. It records up to 16 hours. We process it and identify the speaker. So these segmentation results generate information on when the key child, so the one wearing the recorder, when they're vocalizing, and when an adult is talking near the child. So importantly, this technology does not identify what is being said, just whether the child or an adult is speaking. Okay, so we have 3 core metrics. Adult word count is the measure. It's an estimate of the number of words spoken by an adult near the child. We don't identify words. Our algorithms just estimate them based on like acoustic variables, vowel, consonant distributions, etc. But those estimates are highly correlated with human coder word counts, and that's all described in our technical papers. Okay, child vocalizations, that's our second one. They're operationally defined as any sound generated from the child's vocal tract that does not include cries or sound related to respiration or digestion. So a word is a vocalization, a babble, a coo, etc. Anything that comes out of their vocal tract separated by 300 milliseconds of silence or other sounds. Okay, so that's the way we define it. All has to be defined automatically. Okay, let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about conversational turns. That's our most important metric. Let's see here. Whoops, I've lost. Okay, so talking about now, conversational turns are alternations between the key child vocalizing and an adult caregiver. Turns require both an initiation and a response pair. If the child says something and an adult responds within 5 seconds, that's a turn. And the same goes vice versa. If the adult says something and the child responds within 5 seconds with a word or a vocalization, doesn't matter, that is counted as 1 turn. So conversational turns are basically our proxy for back and forth verbal interactions between adult and child. This measure is significantly correlated with standard measures of child language development, including the PLS-4 and the RIL-3. This is all reported in a paper in the American Journal of Speech Language Pathology in 2017. And I have a big bibliography that includes that citation. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so although conversational turns it's a purely quantitative measure, it's shown by Lena and independent researchers to be the Lena metric that's most predictive of short-term and long-term outcomes in children. It's been connected to brain structure and functions, quantified through pediatric neuroimaging technology. It's been shown to be correlated with the executive functioning, social emotional development. This slide lists some different publications describing that type of research, but just note that there are nearly 200 peer-reviewed scientific articles using Lena technologies in publication currently. So let's go to the next slide. A bit early to be showing the bibliography, but since I'm not going to review these articles, I'm just going to give, this is just some key citations from the slide. If you're looking at this later in a video, you can pause the slide and use this to look up the articles. But since we're at the Reading League webinar, I'm going to take a few minutes just to talk about number 4, which is a recent study looking at brain structure and reading skills using Lena. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here. Okay, so we've got some animation in this slide. So this is the 2019 paper by Mers et al. This is out of Kim Noble's lab at Columbia University, looking at the relationship between 4 things, looking at socioeconomic status, reading skills, brain structure, and language environment. Okay, so we know that socioeconomic status, or SES, predicts reading skills, it predicts language environment, and it predicts brain structure. We also know from using Lena and fMRI technology that language environment is correlated with brain structure. Okay, so knowing that SES is not something you can easily alter. Okay, we know that, but we know that language environment and brain develop are more amenable to change. So knowing those two things, the people who did the study asked the question, how does early language environment mediate the relationship between SES and reading skills? Now, because we're doing brain scans, they had to look at older children. So Lena focuses mainly 0 to 4. They looked at children between 5 and 9 years old. Okay, let's talk about this, the design. Let's go on to the next. Yeah, okay. So this study included a socioeconomically diverse sample in terms of parent education and household income. So that's going to be the first. If you can click there, you'll see the, yeah, there we go. Okay, thank you. Child reading skills measure using the Woodcock-Johnson test of achievement 3. So the letter word identification, word attack, and passage comprehension subtest. Brain scans were done using MRI technology, and then children also completed 2 Lena days to measure the language environment. So the results are really interesting, and I encourage you to read this paper if you have interest in the details. I'm just scratching the surface here, but consistent with previous research, language environment does predict brain structure. So higher adult word exposure and adult child turn taking was associated with more activation in those language supporting cortical structures in the brain. Also consistent with the literature, there was a relationship between SES and reading skills measured by the Woodcock-Johnson. But the special thing about this paper, about this research, is that because we have all 4 of these measures, we can put that into a statistical model and investigate mediating relationships between them. Okay, so go ahead and click. So importantly, the statistical model shows the relationship between SES and reading skills is actually mediated by language input and brain structure. So click one more time. This is good news. SES is hard to change, but language environment can be changed through awareness and intervention. All right, go on to the next slide here. All right, so now we know language environment can influence brain structure and function, and it's indirectly related to reading skills. Let's look at outcomes. First, Lena language programs focus on enhancing early language environment. So our Lena Start program, I mentioned that's a parent group model, and it involves weekly recordings and group meetings, and parents share strategies for increasing quality interaction in the home using the Lena reports. So the graph on the left is from an experimental study by Connie Beecher and her team at Iowa State, showing that treatment parents or parents in Lena Start increased turn taking significantly more than controls during the 8-week program. And on the right, we see longitudinal research from Huntsville City Schools showing that Lena Start participants had significantly higher, their Lena Start participant children had significantly higher kindergarten writing scores compared to match controls. And this is going to be 2 or 3 years after completing Lena Start, which is great. So we have that longitudinal research. Next slide. So we also follow Lena Start participants from program graduation all the way up to 36 months of age. So every 6 months, we send parents a text to complete the developmental snapshot, which is just a questionnaire measuring early child expressive and receptive language skills. So on the right, the graph on the right, we see that children whose language skills were low, that's the red bar, between the 25th or below the 25th percentile at baseline when they started Lena Grow, increased significantly after start, and those increases maintained through the 24-month follow-ups. This is receptive expressive language skills going up as a result of that, of the program that's designed to increase those back and forth interactions. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we've been talking so far about research and programs focused on the home environment. Over the past few years, more work has been done in childcare settings, which is great because we know that a large number of children in the US spend a majority of their waking hours in childcare or preschool with non-parental caregivers. So in a few minutes, John Heilman is going to be talking about evaluation of Lena Grow. Lena Grow is a professional development program for early educators that combines Lena technology with strengths-based coaching. So very briefly, next slide. How does Lena Grow work? This one has some more animation. So on a weekly basis, children wear the Lena device in the pocket of their clothing, captures their language environment throughout the day. Then the audio is uploaded to a computer and automatically processed and automatically deleted. No one listens to it. After each Lena day, the coaches and the teachers meet to review the reports and talk about strategies for incorporating more of those early, quality interactions and just into their daily routines. So teachers are going to set goals for the next week, and those goals are often going to focus on those kids who were experiencing the least amount of talk in the classroom. So we're trying to promote equity within the classroom. All the kids, we want them to be interacting with the teachers the same amount and a lot. So doing this on a weekly basis allows the teachers to see how these small changes in behaviors that don't add a lot of extra work to their day can result in really huge strides for children that they take care of in terms of language development, social interaction, and the most crucial thing of all, relationship building. Okay, next slide. Okay, so part of coaching for all of the Lena programs includes the review of the 14 talking tips. And these are designed to increase quality interactions. The general process is that teachers will sit down with a coach and review the reports. They're going to discuss the children who are not engaging as much as the peers in the classroom. And they'll set goals for increasing turn taking using the talking tips. So let's go to the next slide here. So just to give you an idea of what I mean, here's a subset of the talking tips. So you can see that they're very simple, very accessible. Number one is talk about, if you can go to the next slide, Maura. Keep going. So that's the talking tips. And then the next one shows there's 14 talking tips, and this is just a subset of them. Okay, so number one, talk about what you're doing. Narrate your day to expose children to vocabulary words, and in the same way, comment on what they're doing. Get down on their level. That's hugely important in childcare, and we've gotten feedback that this does wonders for increasing language connections. Tune in and respond, and importantly, wait for their response. So teachers talk about how they get used to talking at the children, but waiting for their response and letting them also talk really brings them into it. Repeat and expand. Okay, so the child says ball, and you say, that's a big red ball. What will you do with it? You know, say what they say, repeat, and then expand on it to get them to expose them to the language and get them to talk back with you. 12, following their leads, super important. Like most humans, children also want to talk about what they're interested in. So when you keep that in mind, those language rich back and forth, they can just go on and on because they're talking about what they're looking at or what they want to be talking about. Okay, so now that I've provided a crash course on what LENA is and what our LENA programs are designed to do, I hand it over to John, and he's going to describe an evaluation of LENA Grow that he recently completed in Milwaukee.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, everyone. I'd like to talk to you about a project we did. So this was in collaboration with Maura and support from the LENA Educational Foundation, as well as, most importantly, a partnership with the Next Door Foundation. So Next Door is, as my dad would say, the Cadillac of early childhood centers in Milwaukee. It's an excellent program, excellent leadership, fantastic, amazing teachers. We've been partnering with Nextdoor for a few years, and then this past year partnered with their child care partnership. So they have gone into, they run some of their own early childhood centers, and then they have gone and provided administrative support and coaching for additional early childhood centers throughout Milwaukee. So what we did with this particular project was partnered with 10 classrooms where they completed the LENA Grow, like Jill described. And then there were 10 other classrooms that were using business as usual practice-based coaching. So everyone was getting coaching, but for the 10, we'll call them treatment classrooms, they had that LENA feedback and the LENA strengths-based coaching. So when we were going into them, what we did is we looked, pre and post. What were some of our measures at the beginning of the session? What were some at the end for both of the groups? So one thing we looked at was the LENA data, and this was only for the treatment classroom. So we looked at some of those measures that Jill described. How many words were the teachers producing? What were the conversational turns between the teachers and the children? We also looked in both groups at a survey that was looking at teacher perceptions, looking at a range of different beliefs and practices. And then we also were looking at some children level outcomes. So their early language and literacy with a tool you may have heard of called Teaching Strategies Gold. So what did we find? In general, we found growth in the amount of words that teachers were producing in the classrooms from the beginning to the end of the program. So the large yellow line with the gold stars, that is the average. So as an average, we saw that the teachers, they increased their talking quite a bit while using this program. I'll talk a little bit more about the individual variability in a bit, but just as this first pass, on average, we see that, yes, Gail, teacher, well, this is, you jumped ahead of me there, Gail. The teacher talked more, but now let's see if the conversations increase. No, I appreciate it. You're giving me the translation or the transition. There we go. They increased their conversational turns, right? So they increased the conversations that they were having. On average, the teachers who were in this program were more responsive to their students. When the students vocalized, when they said something, the teachers and the adults in the room, they were more responsive and they were having more of these early conversations. So now I want to talk a little bit about the individual differences, because we did see some variation. We saw some classrooms where it went up a lot. We saw some where it kind of went up a little bit, and a few where it went down a little bit on average. So we wanted to look at the individual differences across the kids So in general, what we found is that the kids who showed more growth in their turns, first off, they tended to be older. So the 3-year-olds tended to be more responsive to this Lena program than the younger 2-year-olds. We also saw that the kids who had fewer conversational turns at the beginning of the program had greater growth, right? So the kids who weren't conversing as much with their teachers were growing more than the kids who already were doing a lot of growth. And that makes a lot of sense, or a lot of turns. Also, similarly, teachers who weren't interacting with their students as much had greater growth as well. So this was very encouraging because we were seeing that the kids who were talking the least with their teachers and the teachers who were talking less with their kids had the best benefit from this program. Now, just as I said that, I want to have a little caveat there that these were awesome teachers. These were excellent teachers. These teachers, when we look at what they were doing compared to some other programs, they started out quite a bit higher than most other programs. I don't want to make it sound like some of these teachers weren't talking with their kids. Awesome teachers, but just kind of trying to predict where we see the differences in the growth. In this next slide, we also see just another way of showing that on the left here, the bottom third of the classroom. So that's at the beginning, the 1/3 of kids who were having the fewest turns with their teachers had the biggest growth in turns, whereas the kids who are already doing this a lot had less growth. So just another way of showing that last point that I made. Okay, so that was the kids in the Lena program. Now we can kind of add a little bit more rigor to our study. So if you go to the next slide, we can see our teachers who were in the treatment group who were getting the Lena Grow compared to the control group. And this is one where we didn't have a lot of predictions because everyone was getting coaching, high quality practice-based coaching in the control group and the Lena coaching in the treatment group. I don't know if I should say surprisingly or interestingly, what we saw, if we go down and look at this total score group, the majority of teachers who were getting the Lena Grow curriculum, the majority of them increased in their personal beliefs, their job satisfaction, and their perceived self-efficacy. We saw overall some increase and some staying the same and a bit of decrease in the control group. So we did see that there were improved teacher self-ratings in the teachers who were getting the Lena Grow. And I'll talk a little bit about that now. Why might that be? What was some of the feedback that we were getting? So we also interviewed the teachers in this study and in another study we did. And I think one of the things that there were two things going on here. One, I think it's the Lena Grow curriculum really is a strengths-based curriculum where teachers can identify things that they want to work on and really really focus on things they're doing well and things they can improve. The other thing that I think really comes through, this surprised me when doing this work, was the high value that they placed on getting that feedback, right? So often when we're getting any type of coaching or evaluation from our boss or our peers, it's kind of abstract, like, oh yeah, you seem to be teaching a little bit better, or you seem to be performing this a little bit better, but it's kind of abstract and hard to see that. Whereas with this Lena data, they're actually seeing, oh my gosh, I'm talking more, I'm having more conversational turns. And I think that was very satisfying to the teachers. The final set of outcomes that we're going to look at here are the child level outcomes. And these, if we're thinking of a research design, these are the most distal outcomes. So this intervention was on the teacher conversations, the teacher language. It was relatively short, 10 weeks. So we saw those changes in the teacher behavior, but we were unsure if we were going to see many dramatic changes in child outcomes in that short amount of time. And what we see here in these first two, the general language measures and the general cognition are probably better thought of as early academic measures. We see that both groups grew over that 10-week period, and there really wasn't any difference between the treatment and the control group. In our next slide, we did see that the children in the treatment group actually had faster growth in some of these early literacy kind of higher level language outcomes. So the teaching strategies gold, these are 2 and 3-year-olds. So we're not talking like high level phonological awareness or anything, but it's looking a bit more at abstract, higher level language. And there we did see that the kids who were in the Lena group did have faster growth than the kids who were getting business as usual coaching. And then our final slide, just as my summary and my conclusions, I think we had pretty, I'll call them striking increases in words produced in conversational turns for the adults who were in classrooms where they were getting the Lena Grow. And in particular, those teachers and those children who weren't having a lot of conversations really saw a lot of benefit from it. The teachers, they saw value in this. We saw this in, the surveys that we did, but I think, this kind of more objective self-rating score really showed how they found some value here. And when we're looking at the child level outcome, really some of the biggest increases we saw were in that area of emergent literacy. So that was our experience. When we get to the question part, any of us can answer, what this actually looks like in classrooms and how these partnerships work, and, what's the process in incorporating it into the classroom. So we'd be happy to talk about that. And anything else you may want to ask as Maura brings us home here and concludes our presentation.
All right, thanks, Jill and John. So a few concluding thoughts.
Maura, you've accidentally muted yourself.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. And why? Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now? It's good. Okay. So as we've talked about, language skills that support reading comprehension start developing at birth. A lot of research shows that improving the language environment through, increased number of words, especially conversational turns between adults and children, through caregiver or teacher coaching, positively impacts children's early language and early literacy skills. And this has a lot of implications for the prevention of reading delays and disorders. Providing that rich linguistic input from birth to 5, when the brain is developing at just this alarming rate, amazing rate, could help prevent those reading problems that we see in school-age children. And how can we apply these findings to instruction for school-age children when oftentimes that's when the reading problems start to show, and when we start targeting reading, but what can we do to really target their language skills as well to continue to support that reading comprehension? I know last summer we had the Reading League had a book study on bringing words to life, Isabel Beck's book, and it was just such great ideas for promoting vocabulary development and comprehension about concepts that are captured in higher level vocabulary. So I thought that was one. It dovetailed so nicely with what we're doing at the early childhood level by increasing the richness of the language environment. So those are our closing thoughts, and thank you so much for your attention. And now we'd love to hear from you, your questions, thoughts, comments. Turn it over to you guys.
We do have a few in the chat, and
okay.
So, Maura, I'll let you direct these to whomever you think is best to answer. There was a question about, is there training in Lena available for educators, reading specialists, so forth? Is there some training, and where might they access that?
So there's definitely training that goes along with the program. So if anyone was involved with Lena Grow or Lena Home, anyone implementing those programs could obviously get our LENA training. But we also have a lot of resources available online. Just if you go to our website, you can get, for example, those talking tips, and we've got videos behind those. We've also got the talking tips in, I think, 10 different languages. So if you wanted to start out just talking with parents about how to increase quality interactions at home, using those talking tips are a really good start.
And here's a sort of a related question. Would the quality of the adult utterances and turn takings make a difference in the child's oral language development in terms of syntax complexity as well as vocabulary? I remember this was something from the Hart and Risley study that they emphasized that sometimes in the lower socioeconomic groups that they were looking at, not only were the conversational turns fewer, but they were not as rich.
Right. Should I take that more, or do you want to?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So absolutely, the quality of the language environment matters. Quality being the variety of vocabulary, the syntax, the sentence structure. But the interesting thing is that when you increase the amount of talk, you're also increasing quantity, right? So that was showed in the Hart and Risley study. They can see that the more a parent engages in interaction with the children, the more they're bringing in abstract concepts, for example. So rather than talking about business as usual, talking about, do this, do that, go to bed, short phrases, talking about the past or talking about the future is also going to bring in that richer vocabulary, the longer sentences with more complex structure, conjunctions, etc. So that's the beauty of it. When parents try to increase the amount of talk, they're also increasing the complexity as well, which is important.
Yeah, just an example from some of the coaching in LENA Grow. The topics focus on daily routines and how you can increase language within various daily routines. So one of them is hand washing. And just by the nature of providing more language, you're going to provide more interesting words like, oh, the water is cold, it's slippery. Oh, that soap is bubbly. I can feel it as I'm rubbing my hands, just describing the activities that kids are doing on a regular basis automatically kind of brings about a richer vocabulary, a more imaginative kind of talk.
There was also a question about, you had that nice list of tips of ways to incorporate building conversational turns. As Deborah wants to know, maybe on the website, are there more detailed protocols for preschool teachers to help them with that? In addition to just a brief list of tips, is there something that's more specific?
So the detailed program protocols are going to be a part of the LENA Grow program for preschool teachers. So that would be in order to access all of that content and all of the learning modules, etc. The preschool teacher would need to be a part of the Grow program. But Maura, I don't know, you might know of other resources that that teachers can access on other websites. Not sure.
Yes, absolutely, John. Like at ASHA, I'm sure has tips for increasing language, and a lot of them you'll see associated with storybook reading, asking open-ended questions, dialogic storybook reading, following the child's lead, expanding on what the child says. Sometimes they're also called language stimulation techniques, but those same techniques that you would use during, say, storybook reading, you can also use during everyday activities. And when you're outside, when you're eating, mealtime is a great time to increase conversation and talk about foods and textures and likes and dislikes and your family routines and that kind of thing. But if there's, I could, let's see if I can find, Well, asha.org, ASHA.org, has wonderful resources for parents and early childhood educators about language development and how to facilitate language development. So that would be a great resource.
Nicole wanted to know, how do school districts and early childhood classrooms get involved with Lena Grow? Is it a program that needs to be purchased? Where do you go to inquire about it? I'm curious too, whether there are, how many places around Wisconsin, for instance, are actually involved in using this?
I don't know the specifics about our partners in Wisconsin, but definitely our business development people would know that. So if you have questions about it, I would encourage you to go to lena.org, and there's a place to submit questions. But it is a program that people pay for, and we generally are able to hook up people who are interested with funding mechanisms. So we are a nonprofit, right? So we work with a lot of other nonprofits and funders around the country to help people be able to bring the program into the community. But we are in school districts, and generally that is going to happen with school districts that have pre-K programs, because it is focused on younger children.
Yeah, I'd also like to add, just kind of stepping back, and as someone who's not employed by Lena and who thinks about, how do we get programs going at districts. I think, there are a lot of high quality options out there. And so I think it's really thinking about getting coaching going, getting professional learning going, and all of these things. So that said, I think one thing that's really nice with this Lena curriculum are a few things. One is the actual Lena feedback data, like we mentioned. I went into it a bit skeptical, but we did find that was one of the most valued things that the teachers had. I think the other thing that's really nice when you're working with a small nonprofit like the Lena Foundation or the Lena Group, Lena Company, is they also, another thing I've been impressed with is the amount of support that's available to get a coaching program up and running. The trainings that they have are very well laid out, and the materials that they have really take you through it. It's not overly complex. It's not completely overly simplified. So I'm not, I don't want to endorse any one given product. I encourage you to look at multiple products out there, but just those are some of the features that I thought were really nice, especially if you're looking to start out with a coaching program within early childhood setting. It really does have a lot going for it.
Yeah, I would think Wisconsin would be like ripe ground for this, because unlike most states, I mean, we have four-year-old kindergarten pretty much blanketing the state now, and in an increasing number of 3-year-old programs that are being run in districts. So, but one of the things that I noticed, I mean, it's great that we have those programs, but there doesn't really seem to be much of a, not many guidelines about what should be happening during those 3- and 4-year-old years. And this is like perfect information to, perfect activities to infuse into those early childhood years where it could really make a big difference. So Gail wanted to know, has there been a study of talk within the home between parent and child? And she's seeming to be remembering a study prior to 2000. And she thinks that the title of the study might have had the term WEEP in it, WEEP. Is anybody, I mean, I could only think of the Hart and Risley, but anybody
I'm
aware of
familiar
that
with that.
study?
No, I'm not familiar.
I'm not either, but yeah, I mean, all these same types of, it's wherever the children are. Are they at home? Are
Yeah.
they in an early child? Where are they? Does anybody remember? I think it was maybe in Providence, Rhode Island. This had to be 10, 15 years ago. There was kind of a proposal on a citywide basis to build early childhood language. and build it like throughout the community. There were things like, oh, in the grocery store, they would post little, I don't know, if they had some sort of signage, I
Yeah.
suppose, but to
Mhm.
call your attention to, this is a great thing to talk about here, or
Yeah.
so that as whether you're in the grocery store or you're at a playground or wherever, that parents and child caregivers, places where children would be, they're kind of
Mhm.
guided toward, these are opportunities for you to um, engage in conversation with your children.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Providence Talks. So that was 2013 to 2016. That was actually they did a municipal level program using Lena Home. So they did recordings at home, and then they met with parents to talk about how to increase interaction and talk. And so all of the things you just mentioned were a part of that program.
Was that, do you have anything that you could share about the results of that? I mean, is it something that they found valuable, or they went like, oh, nobody paid attention to it, we're
Oh
going to
yeah, no,
discontinue
so
it?
this was actually a Bloomberg Philanthropies Mayor's
Yes.
Challenge winner. And so what happened, it was so successful in Providence that they extended it to 5 other cities, doing what was called a Providence Talks replication. And that was also a 3-year thing, and that ended last year. And so we actually we have some of the white papers on our website describing the evaluations of the replication studies, and some of them are still being worked on and about to be released. So we have all of that stuff on our blog on lena.org. So if you want to learn more about that, or go to our effectiveness webpage, we've got the white papers too.
Yeah, I just found that fascinating. Instead of targeting a classroom, an early childhood classroom, or a certain home, like
Mhm.
expanding it to the entire community, I thought was a very interesting idea. Dawn says, in response to Gail's question about that study that might have had the word weep or the term weep in it, Dawn is wondering, was she referring to the Wisconsin Early Autism Project, which has the acronym WEAP?
Mm.
Could be. Is any of this, I'm just, since that came up in the chat, I've just started to wonder how this what kind of applicability would this have to kids who are diagnosed on the autism spectrum early on. Would this kind of technology be useful? I don't
Yeah.
really know.
It's definitely being used by parents of children with autism, and in programs that focus on children with autism. So there's been a lot of papers on that. If you go to the bibliography section of lena.org, you can see that, I don't know, there's probably been 15 or 20 papers published on that topic. So again, it's about engaging the children, exposing them to language. All of those things are helping them. And so it certainly is a focus within autism research.
Here's another interesting question. Would Lena recognize, I'm not sure exactly how it worked, would it recognize different languages? Somebody's thinking of maybe using this in a bilingual context in a daycare or at home.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So Lena has been validated in both English and Spanish. We do not identify which language is being spoken, but we can do word counts as well as conversational turn counts for both English and Spanish. It's basically language universal when you think about the turn taking, because all it has to do is accurately identify when a child is vocalizing and when an adult is vocalizing. So that's one of the beautiful things about this technology, is that you can use it with many different languages.
Very interesting. I appreciate all the questions that came through tonight. I think they were interesting questions, and I encourage you to go to the Lena site. I have been on there taking a look. There's so much information on there.
Mhm.
And even if you're not in a situation where you envision being able to purchase Lena and be part of that program. There's just so much information on there, so many things that you could just apply on your own to whatever situation you're working in. So hold on, I'm just going to, the other thing I want to encourage you to do is to, if you're interested in more information, I just posted again the link to request a certificate of attendance or more information on Lena technology. So if you're interested in getting more info, that would be great. I think that's all we have time for. It is 8 o'clock, so we've used up our hour. I want to extend a big thank you to Maura and Jill and John for sharing all their knowledge with us this evening. And it's just, I've learned a lot, and I hope that our audience has as well. I just want to remind you, we have a few things still coming up this spring through Reading League Wisconsin. March 6th is our next Tuesday evening presentation. That will be with Steve Dykstra, and he's going to be talking about navigating the world of research for people who really, even if you really hate math, he's going to make it understandable to you. And then April 4th, we have a presentation by Jan Hasbrook on fluency being a key to reading comprehension. We also have Saturday mornings on March 18th and April 15th. We have our Teachers Lounge. That's just a very informal conversation. People can log in and bring questions about how to apply science of reading in the classroom. And we have a discussion about that. So we have 2 of those left this spring. We will be doing a book study this summer, so keep an eye on our social media to check that out. And then we will be having a conference again next fall, our second conference. It's a full day at the Brookfield Conference Center in Wisconsin, and it's on October 27th this year. And Emily Hanford will be our opening keynote speaker in the morning. So we're really excited. We have speakers on lots of different topics. And at the end of the day, we'll be showing the film, The Right to Read, and be having a talk back about that film. And so that's the news from Reading League. We hope that you will stay in touch with us through social media, email us, or check out our website. We have links on our website to our Facebook and our YouTube. And so that's how to stay in touch with us, so we can stay in touch with you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and have a pleasant rest of your evening. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.